Heavyweight matchup coming up this weekend. We have the UFC debut of Salsa Boy, Waldo Cortes-Acosta, making that jump to the ranks, representing the Dominican Republic, taking on Jared Vanderaa. And for Jared Vanderaa, he's kind of like one of my favorite bands out there. And I'm going to out myself right now. Oh, you're a hipster. It's kind of like My Morning Jacket. And there's a song on the record called Just Spinning My Wheels. It's the first song. Jared Vanderea's lost his last 4 fights. And you might go, well, they must be the decent fighters, right? Nah, they're all unranked guys. He did lose, of course, to Alexander Romanov, who's now ranked. He lost to Andrei Arlovski, who's been ranked, a champ in 2005. He lost to Alexei Oleinik, who was once ranked highly.
Now an old man.
But not anymore, not in the UFC anymore. And he lost to Chase Sherman his last time out there in a fight that was relatively competitive, relatively close. It was about 1 round apiece going into the 3rd round. Vanderaa was up in the total numbers in the 3rd round, gets hit by a right cross, gets stunned, goes up against the cage, and Mark Smith let Chase Sherman unload everything he had in the finishing sequence, and Jared Vanderaa got beaten up.
How long ago was that fight again, Craig?
It was hard to watch. Now, Tapology says it was about 3 months ago, so we're gonna be specific on this one and make sure that we dot our I's and cross our T's. So for Jared Vanderaa, his last fight out against Chase Sherman was early July. So
why are we doing this?
It's been a little bit. It's been a little bit since that last fight, but for Vanderaa, it was a really tough loss all that time ago. Now, he is, of course, a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, and he earned that under Tom Galecchio and Big Daddy Joe Stevenson, and he also has high school wrestling in his back pocket. But for Vanderaa, the grappling wrestling that saw him get to become an UFC world champion at heavyweight
hasn't been there.
He's abandoned it in the UFC, and it hasn't been a big part of his game. And some of these decisions that haven't gone his way have been close. I thought he beat Andrei Arlovski. It was a close decision. He was on his way to beating Chase Sherman until he ended up getting finished. So for Vanderaa, if he's able to go back to somewhat of the well that he had of wrestling grappling, it could look like what we assumed would happen in Waldo Cortes-Acosta's LFA title fight when he took on Thomas Peterson, whose wrestling's very good. But it was Cortes-Acosta and his boxing that ended up winning him that fight. So Matt, I'm going to throw it on over to something that a lot of Fight Night Picks fans might not have checked out. We did Dana White's Contender Series previews. For the entire season, we talked a ton about Waldo Cortes-Acosta. We're going to throw it back to that Dana White's Contender Series preview of Cortes-Acosta, and then we're going to talk about his fight against Danilo Suzarci. Your next fight at heavyweight, Waldo Cortes-Acosta. He's undefeated. He's taking on Danilo Suzart of Life Artes Marcias in Brazil, a main training partner of one former UFC heavyweight, Matt's favorite heavyweight fighter, Carlos Felipe, taking on the former pro boxer Waldo Cortes-Acosta. Picked up a big-time LFA title in his last time out against Thomas Peterson. The hometown guy, they were booing Cortes-Acosta. By the end of it, there were some like golf claps in that one because he was looking really good.
He really was, and that's the thing for Waldo. He could be great, but there is a little part of me that does worry because his power is phenomenal when he's able to land his power shots. It's just the delivery system isn't all the way there yet, you know? If he was able to work his way in with a bit better of a jab, if he had slightly higher volume, then maybe I could see some of those bigger power shots landing at a more consistent basis. But right now, he does feel like a very raw prospect, so I'm very curious to see how he makes out on tomorrow's show to get a better gauge as to where his ceiling really could be.
I will kind of zig to that zag, but when I do focus on a pick for this, a lot of people are kind of pointing it out as we were running through this card. Waldo Cortes-Acosta is taking on Danilo Suzart, and when I went down through this one, I hate to be that guy because Cortes-Acosta is one of the biggest favorites that's on this card. I mean, if we look at it for the main event, Matt, you made the pick last week. Pfeiffer was the underdog. Chris Duncan's an underdog in his fight, plus 133. Charlie Campbell, minus 159. Cortes-Acosta coming in a giant favorite, minus 392. But when I was doing the tape study on all of these different fights, and I wanted to make a pick where, hey, I think I'm going to be right on this one. For Danilo Suzart, you watch this guy fight, he marches forward, occasionally throws a kick, and just clubs his overhand right to close distance. He's the least technical heavyweight fighter that you're going to find, and I understand it's squeaky record, so on and so forth, but I went down through his fights. I mean, listen, neither one of these guys has the best striking defense. Both guys have fairly poor takedown defense. I don't expect either guy to take the other guy down. When I look at it for the man out of the DR, Waldo Cortes-Acosta. I mean, much better level of competition than he was beating. Again, combined opponents record for both these guys. For Suzart, 11 and 10 out of the wins. For Waldo Acosta, 43 and 24. If you watch it, I mean, he did have a pro boxing record at 6 and 4, which isn't the sexiest.
I gotta be honest, I didn't really expect that out of him just due to the looping nature of his shots. Normally when we do see people with a boxing background, they're a little bit cleaner, a little bit crisper with their boxing, so I'm surprised to hear that, that's all.
Yeah, when I did look at it for Waldo Cortes-Acosta, though, really does like to pump the jab out there, throw a looping right hand, and that's the one where a guy with a straight shot's going to counter him. Or when he's throwing that looping shot, you can go for the level change and take him down. But when I'm focusing on a fighter to try and think, okay, is this guy UFC ready? Obviously, Hamdi Abdelwahab surprised everybody last week because I didn't think he was going to do what he did in his fight, and didn't he look great against Don'Tale Mayes? But I think Waldo Cortes-Acosta is one of those guys that you drop him in between 25 and 20, somewhere in there. You fight a guy that's unranked, and I think he could have some halfway competitive fights. He's going to have a hard time against, like, 14th ranked Augusto Sakai's fighting this weekend against unranked.
Of course, a guy on Contender Series would have trouble with Augusto Sakai.
Against unranked Sergey Spivak. But when I do look at it, for Waldo Cortes-Acosta, I think he's probably the guy that's going to be able to get it done. And the one big thing, and I think it's going to be an X factor in this fight, yes, Danilo Suzart could club him with one of those overhand rights that he throws. Suzart has poor cardio himself. He throws a lot of single shots, whereas Waldo Cortes-Acosta likes to try and throw in more combination. I love the fact that Cortes-Acosta throws a leg kick and doesn't have a big reset on it. He keeps his hands in a nice spot, doesn't drop them really low to then get countered. So for me, Waldo Cortes-Acosta to get the win, that's my pick for the week. Cortes-Acosta did get into some of those boxing exchanges with Suzarchi. He did get hit with a couple of those big right-hand clubs. Didn't look like they phased him at all. But at the end of the fight, after he gets the finish, Dana White said, big power. I see a lot of things that this guy could work on, or definitely needs work on. And then he goes on to say, but he's a heavyweight. We need heavyweights. And that fight that he had was August 2nd. On August 5th, they announced that he was going to be fighting Jared Vanderaa. So big full camps for both these guys. And obviously high hopes for the undefeated former LFA champion, Cortes-Acosta.
And that's why I'm almost going to contradict myself, so I'll call myself out for it before I even do it. The thing about Cortes-Acosta is I still think he can make improvements as he does age in this division. He's only 31 years old, which sounds old if we're talking about a bantamweight, a featherweight, even a lightweight fighter potentially. But in the heavyweight division, I'm not joking when I say you potentially have another decade of contention in you before you finally do age out of the sport. The last video we just made was for Andrei Arlovski. That man's 43 years old, okay? He's been around the block for a while. Now, on the flip side, Vanderaa honestly is the younger fighter in this matchup, and you're probably thinking, wow, really? But it's the truth. Vanderaa always had youth on his side in a lot of these matchups, and I've always kind of thought, okay, Vanderaa has a good, like I always say, foundational skill set. He can wrestle offensively. He's a well-rounded fighter. We talk about his volume. He doesn't have bad cardio for a heavyweight by any means.
He's a paper cut type of heavyweight, and what I mean by that, it's death by 1,000 cuts with Vanderaa. He was a bit more of a thunderous puncher against the lower level competition before he came into the UFC, but in the fights that we've seen him in, the Arlovski fight, the Chase Sherman fight, it's a lot of volume, it's some decent accuracy, he eats some good shots, and we saw that in his fight against Justin Tafa. He landed a lot of good shots. He landed a lot of good leg kicks. It was a fight of the night. But for Vanderaa, again, he's lost 4 fights in a row, and he's gotten away from the wrestling that kind of got him to the dance.
And that would have a lot of success in this matchup, because I keep on going back to, can Vanderaa stand up to the power of Cortes-Acosta? Even if he didn't get knocked out 2 months ago, I would have a hard time believing that.
Back in July.
Sorry, 3 months ago. It wasn't, like, July's not that long ago, guys. Like, okay, but if it's midway through July, then now we're down to 3.
It's the start of July.
My whole point is, it wasn't that long ago to get knocked out. I much prefer my fighters who are coming off knockout losses to have a 5, 6, 7 month, anything over 6 months I'm normally a lot happier with than a shorter duration, especially when you're fighting a power puncher whose best path to victory is by knockout on the feet. I think Vanderaa does have the wrestling credentials, but my problem is, if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, goodness gracious, then it's probably a duck. Vanderaa hasn't been that duck in a long time.
Hold on.
He hasn't wrestled.
Are you talking about like Paul Correa in the 90s? He's a duck. He likes the jersey tuck?
Vanderaa hasn't been that wrestler in a very long time, and it's very difficult for me to believe that all of a sudden he's going to go back in time to become that fighter that he once was. I think he's going to have a really hard time with not only the physicality of Cortes-Acosta, but I don't know if he's going to be able to eat the power punches of him either.
And I mean, for Cortes-Acosta, what I do like out of him, he really does draw out a lot of feints to his opponent, and then he lands good counter hooks from either side, and he will mix things up. And we touched on it earlier in the Contender Series breakdown, the fact that he has that pro boxing experience. It's not a great record, but it's still a record to have.
He's an athletic guy, though, for how big he is.
Yeah, exactly. So we have a look at the odds in the matchup. Cortes-Acosta, about a -220 favorite. Vanderaa, a +170. And I will say this. Vanderaa was a -200 favorite against Chase Sherman his last time out there. I picked Vanderaa to win fights that he has not won. And again, in the UFC, it hasn't gone all that well. So we have a look at the Tapology votes. Surprised us there to you, but I bet a lot of people are down on Vanderaa at this point. Even though he's a pretty big favorite his last time out. I'm going to say over under 80% for Waldo Cortes-Acosta's UFC debut.
I think it's going to be over.
I think it's going to be over. It's over by a lot. 675 total votes, 92% Cortes-Acosta, 88% by knockout for the 8% that have Vanderaa, 63% by decision. I think if Vanderaa wins, he's going to beat Waldo Cortes-Acosta. He's going to take him down. He's going to submit him. And that's not a hot take. I mean, Vanderaa, jiu-jitsu black belt, good wrestling pedigree, Team Quest, it's his own gym.
TKO ground and pound, I'll throw that in too. Not necessarily submission, but I agree with you, a ground finish.
Yeah, and that is or was his specialty. And if you're fighting for your job and you're trying to keep your spot, that's how Vanderaa would win. I think Cortes-Acosta can beat him to the punch, though. Utilize that boxing, those strong shots. It was an uppercut right hand that knocked out his opponent his last time out. And I think that's a great shot that he could catch Vanderaa with on the way in, because Vanderaa tends to drop his hands a little bit when he walks in. And I think that's going to open up the shots from Cortes-Acosta, who can strike well for a heavyweight moving forwards and moving backwards, and he has good movement side to side. That's what I really like out of him.
Our friend Clint has this thing called the Contender Series fade, where he doesn't like to pick fighters making their UFC debut coming off Contender Series, because a lot of the times, it's a bit of a step too far. We talk about this a lot. You have big favorites on Contender Series, guys who are more or less expected to win, and then they fight guys in the UFC. The thing is, normally they don't fight guys who are on 4-fight losing streaks. And think back to the last guy coming off Contender Series who fought someone on a big losing streak. Joe Pyfer made Alan Amidovsky look like he was never an MMA fighter to begin with. That was a very one-sided fight that ended in a brutal knockout. What I mean is, I agree with his point in a large part. This isn't me ragging on Clint by any means, because I do think it is a big step up in competition for a lot of these guys who are big favorites like, in an empty arena.
Cortes-Acosta was a -435 when all was said and done against Danilo Suzarchi in that one.
But my big point is, normally I would not pick a guy making their debut in the UFC, but he's fighting someone who has lost 4 straight, who's recently coming off a knockout loss, and Cortes-Acosta does have phenomenal knockout power, so that's why I like him in this fight.
We will see if Team Quest's own Jared Vanderaa can get the win in the matchup. Both of us going with the DRs, Waldo Cortes-Acosta to get the win. Let us know down below in the comments section who you have. Tim Means is fighting Max Griffin, and I'm down for it. You should tell your friends about it. And in the main event, Calvin Kattar taking on Arnold Allen. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say. Let's get into it.